Hello everyone, this is the Iron Marshal speaking, and today I will be discussing a topic that has fascinated me for quite some time now. Now, over the years, I've read a great many books on a variety of different subjects, and a great many of them have had a significant impact on me. But out of all of them, I would say that this one in particular has left a particularly significant impact on me. In this book, various issues are discussed which are said to be affecting modern society in the 21st century, which the book claims have resulted in a state of societal decadence. And one issue that pops up in the book, which particularly took my notice, was the issue of sterility. That being that modernity has created an environment wherein the human population is not producing enough children in order to sustain current population levels, and that this is having knock-on effects to various areas of society: political, economic, social, you name it. Now, to fully understand the extent of this problem, we need to understand where we were, where we are, and where we're going. According to Our World in Data, since 1950, global fertility rates have halved from almost 5 children per woman to 2.3 children per woman in 2020. Now, to give you an idea of just what this decline means, the replacement level fertility rate, that being the level needed for a population to just sustain itself, is estimated at around 2.1 children per woman, accounting for things like infant mortality and gender differences. Now, according to another article in The Lancet, in 2021, 110 of 204 nations across the globe had sub-replacement level fertility. By 2050, this number is expected to rise to 155, and by 2100, 198 of the world's 204 nations are expected to have sub-replacement level fertility. The only exceptions to this are expected to be Samoa, Somalia, Tonga, Niger, Chad, and Tajikistan. And out of all the nations of the world, 13 countries, including Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Saudi Arabia, are expected to see fertility rates drop to below 1 child per woman, which, mind you, is basically the disaster zone. These are the sort of fertility rates we're seeing in places like Macau, Hong Kong, and South Korea. Now, we need to understand the impact that this has. According to the United Nations itself, the global population is expected to peak at around 10.3 billion people in the mid-2080s and then decline from there. Just to give you an idea of how much things have changed over the past few years, I remember back in high school reading various different books on what the future would bring. And mind you, many of these books were published in the early to late 90s or early 2000s. And I remember reading in various sections estimations that claimed that by 2100, the human population would exceed 13 billion people. And now we're hearing organizations claiming that the global population will begin declining before the century is even over. And that represents a absolutely massive tectonic shift. To understand the impact that this has, we need to understand what an aging and declining population means for society. According to the Pew Research Center, global fertility rates are expected to drop from 2.5 in 2020 to 1.9 in 2100, and the median age for the population will increase from 31 to 42. Now, one of the impacts of this shift, of this decline in population, is expected to be a benefit for the environment. According to Scientific American, over the past 50 years, while the human population doubled, wildlife populations fell by 69%, and between 70 to 97% of Earth's land was altered by human activity. A decline in population would likely ease the strain on our planet's resources, since, of course, our planet has only a finite amount of resources that we can use to maintain our current standard of living. Now, it's not exactly clear where these limits are. I recall reading books that were panicking about overpopulation, which were published back in the 90s, as I mentioned before. And Thomas Malthus, who has had a significant impact on the study of demography, was panicking about overpopulation back in the early 1800s when the global population had just passed the 1 billion mark. We currently have in excess of 8 billion people, and the planet is yet to collapse. So, ecological arguments aside, we need to discuss the various issues that an aging and declining population has upon the functioning of society. Now, according to Bloomberg, this is one thing to consider. In the past 30 years, more than 60 countries altered their abortion laws. All but 4, those being the United States, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Poland, eased access. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into this issue. That's a story for another day. However, I do believe that this is having an impact upon current fertility rates. You'll notice that countries that don't have very permissive abortion laws, such as in Africa or the Middle East, Southeast Asia, South America, they tend to have higher fertility rates. Now, this is wading into dangerous waters, I realize that, but it is something to consider. One of the other things that I often hear in relation to low fertility rates is that any population decline can be offset with immigration. The idea being that we can import workers from more fertile areas of the world, such as Africa, in order to make up for any gaps in the workforce that may emerge due to population decline. However, I call this something between shooting yourself in the foot and putting a bandage over a gaping wound. Keep in mind, areas like Africa have also experienced a significant decline in fertility, and they're not exempt from the current trend of aging and decline that we're seeing across the world. They're just coming in a few decades behind. According to Ross Doubthat, weird name, he asks, are immigration's economic benefits really worth the social and political risks associated with importing many people from cultures so alien to the late modern West? That's a significant issue to consider. Immigration might help in the short term, but in the long term, it could have serious unforeseeable consequences. And like I said before, it's only a temporary solution because Africa is also experiencing declines in fertility. Just to give you a little idea, according to the Visual Capitalist, Algeria, for instance, experienced a 58% decline in its fertility rate in terms of the number of children born for every 1,000 people. Afghanistan, which also currently has a high fertility rate, has experienced a 27% drop between 1950 and 2021. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has experienced a 9% decline, which is less significant, but there's still a downward trend. I have not heard of a country which is currently seeing its fertility rates go up. Now, it's important to consider that as the world ages, power dynamics are going to shift. Aging continents like Europe and North America are going to start losing political significance as areas like Africa grow in prominence. But problems arise owing to the fact that these areas are not very well developed. They're racked by wars, corruption, and all manner of other issues. And my concern is that as low fertility sets in, it's going to create a variety of different issues and pressures that these areas are not equipped to handle. And furthermore, on a purely societal level, in terms of social stuff and cultures, I believe that this trend of aging is going to have a disastrous impact on our society. Look no further than nations like Japan, which have been grappling with aging for quite some time now, for several decades in fact. These are nations that are plagued with economic and political gridlock. And I believe that fate awaits the rest of the world if the issue of low fertility is not solved. Now, some countries have attempted to combat the issue. Hungary and Russia have featured quite prominently, implementing various pronatalist programs in order to bring the fertility rate back up. Now, Russia experienced a small fertility bump from the late 90s to the early 2000s as the Russian economy grew and the chaos of the initial post-Soviet years eventually subsided. Hungary has implemented quite substantial pro-natalist policies, and this has seen a degree of success, with the Hungarian fertility rate climbing from 1.2 to 1.5 over the span of about a decade. However, these are, as I said before, bandages over gaping wounds. Another major concern to consider is that as the situation becomes more desperate, we could see countries implementing drastic measures in order to bring the fertility rate back up. If you want an idea of what that looks like, look up Decree 770 from Communist Romania. I think it'll shock you. But for now, that is the main thing to consider. There's a whole range of other things to consider, but for now, I'll leave it at that. Maybe I'll make another video in future describing this issue. This is the Iron Marshal, signing off.